Welcome back to the TrailBLAZER Pod. I'm your host Faye, and each Tuesday I bring you stories of Jewish women who are trailblazers. In this deeply moving episode, Beth Segaloff, founder of the Tree of Life Center, opens up about love, loss, and transformation. After losing her fiancé Ben when he was killed in Afghanistan, Beth faced the depths of grief. Through her healing journey, she found light in holistic practices and now helps others do the same. Let's dive in. Welcome to the TrailBLAZER Pod. It's so great to have you and reconnect again. We were talking before, it's Mental Health Awareness Month. So I think this is the perfect time to have this conversation and you're the perfect person to talk to. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
So I always start with asking my guests who they were as a little kid. So I want to understand, Beth, as a little girl, what was your childhood like and what were you like?
I feel like I would probably be described as just like a sweet girl, sweet, happy, sweet. Like when I think about my younger childhood, I really feel like I was so fortunate to have a family that was very close, and we had a lot of family friends that spent a lot of time together. So it was really, I feel like I was raised in a village of those people where I know Today I could call any one of them and they would be there for me.
That's so cool.
It was really special. So I feel like I grew up with that level of support, and that was really special for me. But also I remember always being aware of when other people were maybe hurting, or other people that may, and I don't like the phrase had less, but people who just I remember being aware of if somebody was left out or excluded, or being aware of that, and I always, as a kid, like a teenager, high school, mostly, I had and middle school, really, school was very hard for me. I had to work really hard. So that was not easy for me.
Did that make you feel like an outsider?
I don't, it's so funny because I don't know if it's funny, but I don't remember. When I think about it now, I'm sure, yes. I don't. I was never made to feel by my parents ever that I was less than or not smart enough, but those are definitely beliefs that I took on because school was very hard, and I didn't feel I always had to get extra help.
Yeah. Sometimes when kids aren't good in school, they find something outside of school that they excel at or they're so passionate about. Did you have something like that as a child?
It was probably sports.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I had a feeling that it was something like that. You also I listened to a couple of other interviews you did, and you were saying that you were a pretty sensitive child, which makes sense now. You were saying you're able to like an empath, you're able to feel other people's feelings and notice things that maybe a lot of kids don't notice. How did that show up in your early life? You're talking about noticing people who have maybe less than you, or maybe a little less fortunate, but did that make you feel responsible for them? Did you take on the toll of that, carrying the world on your shoulders as a little girl?
I know what you mean, and I don't, again, thinking about it now, I don't know if I felt that then. I just felt such empathy. I think that's what, and we didn't use the word empathy a lot in the 80s.
Exactly.
That, thinking about it now, I just always felt so much empathy and wanting to be around people or support people. I remember as a little girl going to just doing different volunteer things, and that's where I was always drawn.
And full circle, because look what you're doing now, right?
I know. Yeah.
We'll talk about them in a little bit. So in that interview, you were mentioning you were trying to manage a lot of emotions, and you didn't always have the right coping skills.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll let you share as much as you want, in terms of how you coped with that, and maybe it wasn't the best, and how you learned that they weren't the correct coping skills and what was.
So I think where this ties in is that I went to boarding school, which was a huge shock because, again, I was saying, I grew up in this family, in this community, and a lot of Jewish people were not going to boarding school.
Yeah.
And I did not get into the private school that my brother went to, all the family friends, all the kids went to. And I remember going to visit a friend whose parents had worked at a boarding school. And I came home and I was like, oh my God, this is like camp. I grew up going to summer camp for my entire life, and camp was the happiest place ever for me. And I was like, I want to go to boarding school. And my parents were like, okay. And that
Really?
was it was a very quick, it wasn't,
Okay.
my parents now say that like I really marketed it really well, that like I wanted to go. I remember it a little bit differently, but that was a very clear line in my life of sort of before boarding school and after.
Okay.
And I think when I went to boarding school, you put 200 kids together, co-ed, and there was no mental health awareness month, let's say that. There was no talk about anything, drinking, sex, drugs, nothing.
Yeah.
And it was there was a lot of rigidity and rules and boundaries, which there had to be, but which meant sort of at those little moments of free time, a lot happened. And I think so I experienced a lot early that I may not have. And when you ask how I dealt with my emotions, I don't think I did. I didn't. But even looking back when I was in high school, I'm thinking about this right now as you asked me this, is I was a peer mentoring program.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was a peer mentor. So I was helping other kids who were struggling.
Makes so much sense.
Right. But not really talking about my
Right.
own at all. And isn't that convenient that I got to help everybody else rather than really look at my own? And sort of the same thing in college is I remember I was part of a program. And again, we went out into different classes and dorms talking about all the things. And again, not
Yeah.
looking at myself at all. So I was not managing very well.
So when did you notice that you were not, and what did you do about it?
I can't remember when I first noticed, but I did struggle with an eating disorder. And
Me too.
you too?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there got to a point where I chose to get help. And I think around the same time, I had decided to go back to school for my master's in social work. And I remember, I think I'd just taken a class. I was living in New York and I took a class at NYU to see if it's something that I really wanted to pursue. And one of the first conversations was, do you have a therapist? If you're going to go to social work school, you should be in therapy. And I had never been to therapy. And I don't know if that's the moment where things started to open up, but it was definitely a door to, okay, if this is the path you're choosing for work, and it felt so organic that I had to start looking at myself.
Wow. That's really powerful.
Which really sucked, by the way. It's very clear to me why people don't want to look and don't want to go inward, because it can be very, very dark.
Yeah. And it's
Really
really
dark.
hard work.
But I do think, again, as my own healing grew or expanded, and then again, this is a span over 20 plus years, the more I get to hold for other people.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you mentioned the eating disorder. I didn't know this. So you did mention you went into social work, and I can totally understand how, but like, why did you think of social work?
Well, I think, again, going back to just, if you were to ask me when I was a little girl what I wanted to do, I would say I want to be a mom and I want to help people.
Oh.
And I majored in child and family studies. I was always just interested in people.
Yeah.
Like I remember I was thinking about teaching, and then I spent some time in the classroom, but I was like, I want to know what's going on at home. Like why, when you're showing up at school, why why certain behavior was showing up, or if they were making friends or not making friends, or why school was hard for them, right? So
Yeah.
I was always just interested in understanding the person and their environment and what was maybe affecting how they were relating to the world. And so social work just made sense to me.
Yeah. Like, it sounds like you were trying to understand like the more holistic approach, which is your work now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, foreshadow.
It's also very much connected, I feel like, to being brought up in the Jewish values around giving back and tikkun olam, and education being important. So it all just felt very aligned and organic.
Yeah. I read that I actually found an article on this. It's pretty cool that you help families who lost loved ones after 9/11.
I did. So my first job at a social work school was in a school in Brooklyn. And that's what I wanted to do, is school social work, is what I did for 16 years. But I was living in New York City. And so on 9/11, I was at work in Brooklyn. And to make a long story short, well, part of it is on September 12th, woke up and walked down to the Red Cross just to see, like, is there anything that I can do?
Yeah.
And they let me in because I'm a social worker. One of the jobs or tasks that I was given for those few days was to call family members and ask if there was anything that we could identify their loved one. And I ended up, so I was there for a little while, and then I went back to my job, and then I ended up leaving my job and going to work for the Red Cross for a little while, and then working with the families whose loved ones had died and helping them just support them in whatever they may needed.
This is like a heavy topic, but I think that's going to be our conversation. But I'm curious, like you dealt with your own grief. So we're going to get into that, but I want to start by asking you, like, how do you cope with hearing so much sadness from other people?
It's a lot of practice, and it's working on my own and really being able to hold that space and knowing that it's not mine, and just being able to be present with, and again, I find that it's the most humbling place, right? What an honor to sit with somebody in their pain. And it's not easy. And there were times, right, where there's a lot of burnout, and it's like, would be hard to come home and how was your day? I remember when I was working at the school in Brooklyn and at this job with the Red Cross, it was really hard to come home to my life. And I was newly married at the time, but having spent the day with people who were—
Did you have guilt?
Thinking about it now, I mean, yes, I'm sure thinking about it now, there was some guilt of like how, it was more of like, how do I get to live like this when somebody is going through such pain? It was really just a deep sadness.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the most natural human thing. I think it would be scary if you didn't feel that, right?
But what's so ironic is not the right word, and jumping a little bit, but because I know we're going to talk about my story connected to grief, but connecting the dots around me working for the Red Cross after 9/11, and then my fiancé, Ben, who was killed in Afghanistan, 8 years later, there's people who are helping me because of the war that started after 9/11.
Yeah.
So
that's exactly what I was going to talk to you about. That's why I wanted to understand how you first dealt with other people. So let's talk about that. Let's start by what was yours and Ben's relationship? Like how did that come about?
So I was married, and we have a son named Danny, and he's now 21, and we got divorced when he was about 2. And that was, very, very challenging time in my life. And it was also very empowering and a time for healing as well. And so just to jump then to the Ben part, my parents live in this little tiny beach community. It's kind of like a shtetl, literally. It is. It's adorable.
So cute.
And my parents I was coming to visit them July 4th weekend, and they were like, just so you know, we're having dinner at the Segaloff's house. And I was like, okay, fine. Like, it's very common that people just come and go for dinner. And my dad and Ben's mom were law partners. And a friend of mine was with me for the weekend, and we went to their house for dinner. And it was literally like the moment that you imagine, and it was just like, oh, there you are. And we ended up spending time together that night. And then we sort of like finagled ways to see each other over the weekend. And I was like, I'm going to go back to the Segaloff's for dinner. And then we sat on the beach one night till like 3 a.m. just talking. And I remember my friend said to me, she's like, you're going to marry that guy. Oh. And 6 weeks later, he said to me, I have good news and bad news. The good news is we're getting married at the beach next summer. And the bad news is I'm deploying. And I didn't even really know what that meant. I mean, I knew what it meant, but I'm not from a military background. Yeah. We didn't have family in the military, but we just followed his lead because he was so positive and about how everything was going to be.
Did he have previous deployments?
He did.
Okay, so he's like, I've done this. I know what it is, right?
He was civil affairs, and so he was really a humanitarian. So
it's such an interesting job.
His approach was, I have the army behind me to help as many people as I can in the most challenging places.
It's amazing because when you think about that, you both had very similar missions, you just
Yeah.
in different ways, right? When he was deployed, it's hard. There's a lot of loneliness, and how did that affect you?
It was scary, but it was also, we had like a system that when he was deployed, also was very connected to his family. And so that really helped. And just being together and being in it together was very supportive.
Yeah.
But we did things like, we kept a video blog back and forth called The Story of the Day. And so, like, we would make videos and send them. He would make videos and send them. We wrote in a book every single day, my son and I,
Wow.
of like, this is what we did today. And then my favorite part of the day was, and he wrote us back and would send to us. And so, and we talked as much as we could. That's how
Yeah.
that's how it was. And it was just, we were planning our wedding and we were emailing about like which band we were going to use or a DJ or
The logistics.
all the logistics of the wedding. And so he was, one of his best friends described him as contagious. And that was why it was obviously very scary, but he never let
Yeah.
on that it was as dangerous as it was.
Right. Can you talk to me about when you found out what happened? I'm gonna let you share.
It's actually, Danny and I he was getting consecrated into Hebrew school.
Wow.
And we had run home because it was late. And we had put some things, we put like the pamphlet from consecration into a package that we were mailing in the morning. And I got a phone call. I was living in an apartment. I knew it was from my, there's a number that I didn't know, but I knew it was my building. But you still pick up any number because it could have been him. And they said, there's people from the military here. And I said to them, I said, let them know to call me back because I wanted to get Danny to bed because you just know.
So you knew in that moment
I knew.
why they were there.
And
Was this a conversation that ever happened? Like if they show you knew in your
yeah, no,
before.
he had to actually, which I didn't know this before, but when you deploy, you have to designate the people that the military goes to.
The point of contact.
So I call back and actually after I put Danny to bed, I sat in my closet. This is what I remember, sitting in my closet, and I called my parents. They were away, and I said, somebody's here. And my dad said, I know. And he said, Laura and Gary, that's Ben's parents, everyone's on their way.
To you?
Yeah. And then I said, okay, let them upstairs. And then I don't know what they said. But it's like what you see in the movies.
Yeah.
It is. And that was literally like the minute that my life became a before and after.
So Ben was killed in action in Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, I'm so sorry for your
Thank
loss. I wanna talk to you. We're gonna talk about the grief because that's a huge part of what you've turned your life into now. But something so beautiful that you shared was Ben's connection to Judaism and then what that did for you. And I just to turn it a little bit more positive for a second, can you share that with all of us? Because it's such a beautiful part of your story.
I think you had just alluded to it before of like, we had these very similar values of giving back. And so that was part of what we had planned to do together. And that's I can feel it now because it's like I'm doing this work and sometimes not that he would be doing this work with me,
Right.
but I just feel like there's more that we would have done together. And that just makes me really sad.
Does it give you also, in a sense, like the courage to continue the work you're doing?
It gives me the courage to continue, but this is like the meaning part of my grief. This is I was doing, because I was working for the Red Cross for a bit with 9/11, but I wasn't doing a lot of grief work before. But I've also come to realize that grief is very universal. Grief and trauma are very universal. And so I do feel like it is the meaning piece of my grief that I can expand my work in different ways than I had expected.
So we were talking before, all the things that you experienced and all the emotions, you didn't really tune into them at all, right? For a long time. I'm curious, with this grief, did you experience the same thing, or did you, because you were already doing so much of the work, you were able to to heal through it right away? I'm just curious what the experience was for you.
Oh, it was definitely not right away.
But were you able to feel it right away?
I mean, I just feel like it's like it takes your breath away. And so, yes, I felt such pain. I felt such overwhelm and despair and hopeless and helpless and anger, a lot of anger. So I did allow myself to feel that. And I also had to shut it down. I was working and a single mom to a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
And so that was complicated to find ways to give myself that space to be in it, and also to just have to show up every day. And I didn't want him to see that part of me all the time. I didn't want it to always be sad. And
yeah, that was my next question, actually, is like, it's one thing to experience this as yourself. It's another when you have a child involved that is a big part, right? This was going to be a huge part of Danny's life, right? So how did, I know you were mentioning it's hard, but like, how do you juggle with a 5-year-old? How do you explain it to a 5-year-old and then also let mom feel the things mom needs to feel?
Yeah. I think that we just I talked about it a lot. We talked about Ben a lot, and a 5-year-old grieving is very different than an adult. And so people from the military were around quite a bit because you're assigned, it's the worst phrase ever, but you're assigned a casualty assistance officer.
Really?
And so that person was this like unbelievable touchstone of a human. Oh. And, he would sometimes show up and like come with me to pick Danny up from school. Wow. But he had to come and bring like all of Ben's belongings. Every time something would come back, he would bring, that's something that it's different in this type of grief. It's like, got like, 10 big black canisters of all of his things. And we had to go through every single, it'd be like checklist, one black pen, one green shirt, every single item.
Like so methodical, when like grief is the opposite of that.
And all you want to do, or all I wanted to do, is like take a shirt of his and like hold it and smell it. Yeah. But it's like stark folded, every single thing in a separate Ziploc bag. But I think for Danny to be part of some of that was, I don't know what it was like for him, but I think I didn't shun him from it because it just was our life. We just talked about Ben. I still talk about Ben to him. He's 21. And we would celebrate his birthday, and I would acknowledge something that he would have liked. So just trying to keep the love and the memories alive. Just to tie in a little bit to like some of the work now and our experience then, so he was in kindergarten, and I remember we were new at this school, and I moved like a town away. And so didn't really know anybody. And he died in October. So this was like, we were at school for like a month. And nobody said a word. Not a word. And were
they scared?
I was like, does anybody know what happened? So I asked the principal and the psychologist. Now, mind you, at this point in my career, I'm a school social worker, right? Yeah. And I said, I'm just curious, what do you do when somebody dies? Yeah. And word for word, they said to me, we usually send a letter home, but you're new here and he wasn't the dad.
Seriously?
And I was like, okay. And then a month later was Veterans Day. And I said, do you do anything for Veterans Day? And they said, it's not in our curriculum. And I was like, wow, that is, talk about being isolated and unseen. And my son was playing it out on the playground. Of course, like talking about a bomb or talking about, not in a violent way at all,
Right,
but playing like, oh, there's a bomb, you know, so because that's how kids process.
100%.
And no one said a word.
Oh my God. And it's even a bigger conversation. I think a lot of times people struggle with knowing how to help somebody.
Right.
Which I know you deal a lot with that. Even as an adult, like if somebody's going through something, it's like you don't want to say the wrong thing. You want to be there and you don't want to ask them, how can I be there for you? Because that feels awkward, even though that's probably the thing you should do.
Right.
Because everyone needs something.
Well, right. And that's what I would say. Like people would, can we drive Danny? Can I get you food? And I'm like, what you can do is sit next to me.
Yeah.
Like I don't need anything except your presence. And that is not easy for people to do.
Yeah.
Because it is really hard. And I didn't hide my feelings so well. So somebody asked me how I was, I may have told them.
Yeah.
Deeply.
Good for you.
Yes. And, I think it's also like, I've learned to really discern, like that doesn't, that,
not everyone has to know.
Not everyone has to know, that I was crying on the kitchen floor an hour before. So I think that, there was a lot that was going on at that time.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for people to hold that. And I understand that. How would you know what to do? People say, I can't imagine. And I would say, please don't.
Hope you never know.
Imagine how this would feel. Because I would never wish this on anybody.
So let's talk a little bit about, I know it's a never ending journey of healing, but what did start helping you?
Okay. So yes. So I will say that like I was in therapy and I was sort of like this, I can't talk about this anymore. Like there's just, I don't know what else to say anymore about this. And a friend of mine offered me a Reiki session. And it was the first time where I was like, I felt a body sense of peace.
Can you explain what Reiki is?
Sure. Oh, sorry. Reiki is an energy healing and it supports balancing chakras, and it's very peaceful. It can be very peaceful. Nothing can ever be like wrong or bad with the Reiki healing. It's universal energy, and it can be touch or no touch. So my friend offered me, and I just like my body, my nervous system, which was on fire for a really long time, relaxed for a moment. And I was like, wow, that sort of started the path of maybe I need something different. I had gone to yoga many times in my past, but it was much more of a physical practice.
Yeah.
I found my yoga mat and I just cried on my mat. I joined a local studio, which was a little bit more gentle yoga, which was sort of, again, not I'm a runner. And, and I was like, I don't really want to go to gentle yoga, but I'll go.
I get it.
And as we were sort of talking about before, about how it's hard to look at some of the hard stuff.
Yeah.
When I would cry on my mat and the teacher would say, quiet your mind and let your body be still. Can I swear here?
Yes.
I'd be like, fuck you. Yeah. That is like, why do you think I would want to be in my mind when it's quiet?
Right. It's the last place.
And why would I want to be in my body that I'd had such a horrible relationship with?
Yeah.
But I will say that inch by inch, minute by minute, breath by breath, something happened. And again, my nervous system started to feel a little bit more safe. And that was what really started, again, just another level of healing, of opening up. I went to EMDR.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Which is another treatment for trauma. And the other really big piece that supported my healing was being with people who got it. I was quickly introduced to an organization that was all military widows, and they brought me in, which was, according to the military, we weren't legally married. So I didn't really care that they didn't see me that way, but this group of people, like, of course, like, brought me in. And so being with people, and I did retreats with them, and that felt like, because, it's what's really something that I would say about grief is that when you let yourself be with it, like, so there'd be moments of, hysterical on the floor, screaming and crying. And then 5 minutes later, like, laughing uncontrollably, and just joy.
Yeah.
And so communities like that, and friends and family who were able to sort of be with me in that way, are things
It's so
that
special
started.
because it ties back to what we spoke about right in the beginning about your childhood, of having that community and having that support group and having those people literally the same thing,
Yeah.
just in different ways. So let's talk about how your work shifted after you started experiencing all of that. I know I'll let you tell the audience like what you do.
Well, so I was working in school still, but I was at the same time, like, I was experiencing Reiki and yoga. And so I decided to leave my school job. I took this, like, big leap of faith, because I was like, I just feel like there's something more, and I was also as a child, by the way, I remember, or a teenager, really asking the questions about why. I was like wondering, what happens when we die? Where is God? Where are my grandparents who had passed? Right. So I was always very, like, I look back at books that I had bought in college that were sort of these very philosophical, deep
I relate.
questions. But I put a lot of those away for a while because I was
doing the thing.
And so I took this leap of faith, and I left my school job, and I became a Reiki master. And I remember being like, I'm just going to open a Reiki practice. My family is so supportive. I remember my dad was like, okay, like, what is that? But okay. And what was happening is I would get clients, but I would find that, like, my therapeutic part, my social work layer, was in the room with the energy healing. And then I got my yoga teacher training, and sort of the same thing. I was like, well, that is coming into the room as well. And I actually found, like, the yoga teacher training was a lot for me personally. And I was curious about teaching, but when I would teach, I'd run groups for years in school. And so when I started teaching yoga, I was very confused that no one was talking back. Because I was like, why am I the only one speaking here? This is so boring. Like, no one needs to be listening to me talk.
That's funny.
I like being in the group where it's about everybody else. But so all those things, and then I became certified in EMDR. And so I really just, when I was on my mat, realizing that mental health, yes, but there are so many other layers that need to be addressed. The layer of the body, the layer of the breath, our emotional state, and our intuition. And so I really just wanted to bring all of that together and support people from a much more holistic way, which that was probably about 10 years ago, was really out of the box then.
Yeah.
That was, people were not talking about sort of
any of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you do that? What did it turn into?
So it turned into Tree of Life, which is so funny because I'm sitting here in my new space, which I just opened in March, but I created my business name in 2014.
Wow.
And so I've been Tree of Life, but I've just sort of been like Beth Segaloff. And so my really intention was to create a space for me to work with clients one-on-one, to hold groups, and to hold a space for other people that I wish that I'd had at challenging times in my life.
Does it help you as you help others? It kind of ties back to what we were talking. Yeah.
Yeah.
How does helping others help you? But at the same time, what do you need for yourself to be able to help others?
I feel like I know what it feels like to not be heard, to be misunderstood, to feel unseen. I know what that feels like. And to feel like there's something wrong with me and that I need to be fixed and that there's a solution. And I also know what it feels like to be held without having to do anything or say anything. I know what it feels like to have somebody's presence be the answer.
Wow.
And if I can give that back to somebody for a moment, that is enough.
Wow. That's beautiful.
That's really, and so that feeling has been such a gift to me that that's what I want to give back. You know, I was telling you before, I have a middle school client that I'm working with, and she said to me yesterday, she's dealing with a lot of, feelings of unworthiness and not enough and friend group drama. And she said to me the other day, I want to learn how to help people so that they don't have to feel this way.
That's so special.
Yeah. And I think the only tweak I would give to that is that one thing that I really felt, not like only learned, but a felt sense, is that these feelings, the challenging ones connected to grief, connected to trauma, adversity, whatever you want to call it, don't go away. If I want to be like, I just don't want to feel sad anymore, I don't want this to be here, it's not reality. But the truth is that we can learn how to shift the relationship with those feelings. And so I know that grief is going to show up, but I'm not in mourning, and I'm also not, the grief is not overwhelming to me today.
Yeah.
But I know that it's going to show up again. But I also know that my relationship to it can change. So I think that is what I also.
That's really important.
Yeah.
So that brings me to my next question. Somebody who's listening that is grieving and has no idea where to start with anything, like, it's ground zero. What advice would you give to them?
Well, I think the willingness to show up. I mean, when people make the phone call to me or show up in a group, it's like, you got here. That is something, there's something in you that said, I either I need extra support, or when you feel like the most alone in the world, that you're not. Like, I know when people would say to me, you're not alone, I'd be like, yes, I am. I actually am alone. Yeah. But I think what I would say to people is to show up where it feels light, where it feels aligned, and that I can hold the pain with them until they're ready to hold some of it on their own. But together, we can do that together. So one other thing, I think sometimes, and you may have felt this way before, when somebody shares something that feels like very heavy.
Yeah.
And then I felt this way of like, oh my God, like, but now what I'm experiencing is like nothing. Right?
Yeah,
like if
comparing the pain.
And so I think there's no competition in grief.
Yeah.
My story is mine. Yeah. And I didn't make this up, but when somebody said like, whose grief here is the worst? Oh my God. Yours, your own. Your dog may have died. You may have had a fight with your best friend. Yeah. And it's your pain is the worst. I don't mean the worst, but your pain is yours. And so I think that's something just to share in the way of, and that's why I feel like there is something about being with people who get it, like that you can be in community and healing with, people who have experienced something similar to you. And so this is like a yes and, that grief is pain. Right. And we all have experienced something in life where it's been what we didn't expect, and that there are feelings of grief connected to that. So I just think that's important to share.
It's really important because I know even myself, sometimes you go through things and then you hear of a horrible story and you're like, wait, am I even allowed to think the way I think right now? Right? It's like giving permission to yourself that,
right,
no one's life looks the same. It comes out in so many different ways. So thank you. That's really important. Thank you so much for sharing that. So what's your vision for the Tree of Life?
I've been thinking about this a lot because it's a new space, and I think that there's a couple things, but it's really, I'm working with this intersection between grief and trauma, and also with like adolescence and communities, because my story is my story, but everybody has their own experience. If you are a human being, you have probably experienced some level of adversity and some level of grief. Yeah. Grief is not only the death of a loved one, right? It can be a loss of a part of yourself, or the life that you expected, a transition, a divorce, a friendship breakup. And so there's that intersection between grief, adversity, and normalizing it, and doing that. So the vision,
advocacy.
yeah, like just normalizing it, that it is universal. And I think, I mean, oh my God, like if we don't get that as a community now, from the pandemic and from school violence and just what's happening in the world, if we are going to close our eyes and say, I'm fine.
Yeah.
It's just, so I, through groups and through programs, I just want to hold those spaces for whether it's individuals or life school that I run, to really just bring this level of awareness, and that people are not alone, and to give information and skill and tools, because there are a lot of tools that people can use every day to just, open up a little bit more.
That like they would never know about, because
how would you
talk
know
about it? Yeah.
But how would you know? And that's a little bit about the difference of, again, we can talk about things all day long.
Yes.
But until we work with the system, it's really, that's when I've noticed, whether it's with individuals or in groups, that's when I've noticed the biggest shifts. Because again, we can talk about like, I'm strong, I'm resilient, but until we feel that in our body, and when we do that in community, it's like magic.
Yeah.
Because then it's like, oh, like I feel that too. And truthfully, like witnessing is medicine.
Yeah, it really is. And I strongly align on all of this with you. It's part of the reason why I started this podcast. Is, of course, I wanted to, like, it's kind of like I see it as like a personal mentorship little thing, but it's also when you listen to people's stories, I always say this, like, if you hear somebody going through something even remotely similar, that switches something in your brain, because you're like, oh, I'm not crazy.
100%.
This is a normal feeling. Like, and I'm going to use the word medicine because there's no better medicine than to know that you're not an alien in this world, right?
Yes.
And
it gives you permission. It gives you permission to express your own, and that's what I see with kids, that when it's the most amazing, you get a group of kids together and I work with them. So I know they all, and adults too, but everybody feels like they're the only one.
Exactly. Always.
They just do. They feel like they're the only one. And when you get a group of adolescents together, again, and adults, and somebody says, I'm stressed about X, my mother is driving me crazy. I feel like nothing I do is right, whatever it may be. And somebody else is like, oh my God, same.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden there's this big exhale. And when we can do that with one another, and then you have this sense of belonging, right? In a world where everybody's so isolated, that it's just being present to that. I feel so grateful that I am in a field where I get to create that space.
It's amazing.
So that they can have that dialogue, and then tools to manage it. When I have teenagers say to me, Beth, like, I realized I was feeling anxiety in my stomach. And so I did a breathing technique, or I did, whatever we were working on.
Yeah.
It's like, can you imagine?
Wow.
That's what I think about. I had issues. My stomach hurt for my whole life. If I'd ever been told age 16, like, where do you feel anxiety in your body?
Yeah. My stomach.
I guess it's my stomach.
Yeah. It's so special. You just changed people's lives like that. Because I'm just thinking, like, imagine going through something like that. So you have to deal with the thing. But then on top of that, you have to deal with the fact that you think you're crazy. So you're dealing with a layer on top of that, right? You take that away, it gives you room to deal with the actual things you're experiencing. So just thank you for doing the work you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
I just want to end off by asking you the question that I ask all my guests, which is, what does being trailblazer mean to you?
I thought about this question a lot, and I think it's ever changing, because I think, like, I always thought, like, oh, I'm taking this path. And then, nope, I guess I'm on this path. And then it's like, nope, sorry. Well, I guess I'm going to choose this path. And so I think for me, being a trailblazer would mean really aligning with my heart. And that trail or that path, maybe one step one day in this direction and another step a different direction another day, and thinking out of the box.
Yeah.
And doing something different. A trailblazer feels like perspective, right? Like making those choices and those steps from a perspective from the heart.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Beth, for joining me.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate it.